Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. So, today, what I'm going to be talking about is how you can break free and heal from toxic relationships. So, this is something I've been meaning to talk about for a while. It's been something I've been working with for a very long time. I've been getting some really good results with it. And in my experience, it's also something that until a person is in that dynamic, it can feel very, very overwhelming. Do you know what they do, as well as how to safely get away from a situation like that? And one of the big things that I see the most is feeling stuck. Then when it comes to the healing journey, and this is for a number of reasons, and I'm going to get into that within this episode. I'll be talking about signs of a toxic relationship, things they look out for, how to safely get away from a toxic relationship if you find that you're in one, and then some of the most effective ways, in my experience, I have found working with a lot of people, healing and recovering from abusive or toxic relationships, what I have found to be the most effective. So there's a lot to cover in this topic, and it can be quite draining. So for anybody that's listening to this, tap in and out of it, take what you need from it. If it is stirring anything in you, the invitation I would give you is please go and seek help, whether it's with me or somebody else, or you know, but access a support service of some sort. Don't sit on it because there's something that's coming up in your awareness that's showing that there's wounding that's still there. So one of the first things I think that would be really important to dive into would be, first of all, just looking at what constitutes toxic behavior. Now, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I suppose in many ways it's more interchangeable with abusive. Some people get defensive and they're like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't call people toxic. Nobody's inherently toxic." Well, look, some people just behave like dickheads. At the end of the day, abusive behavior is abusive behavior, and it's recognizing the impact. Never like forget the whole intention of what people say, hurt people, hurt people. Looking at the impact that this behavior has on somebody, especially if you're the person that's on the receiving end of it and you've been in maybe one or two toxic relationships. It's about recognizing the signs, so that this can be corrected going forward, so that it's not unconsciously replaying over and over and over again. So, on that topic of communication, that is one of the clear signs that you'll see that you're in a toxic relationship. Now, look, everybody's got stuff. Everybody's got dysfunctional, to a point, dysfunctional communication strategies, because we inherit some stuff. And, if we're fortunate enough that we came from a household where nobody had any baggage or any trauma or any communication issues, then you're in the minority, because the majority of people have stuff they work on. But when you're looking at it through the lens of a toxic relationship, we're talking about these things on repeat, or maybe being stretched out to a more extreme version of them. So stonewalling and silent treatment, these are one of the clearest indicators that you're going through an abusive cycle. Now, that's also been something that's been validated by the Gottman Institute, studying why relationships are doomed to fail. So that would also, those four horsemen would be community or contemptuous behavior, seeing the absolute worst in the person and speaking to them in that manner, constantly criticizing them, constantly putting them down. The stonewalling and silent treatment is instilling guilt, it's instilling fear, anxiety, compliance. Um, Contemptuous communication, like also just building on that, belittling the person, name calling, and this is repetitive. So keep in mind, this is a repetitive cycle that you're being exposed to. Swearing, becoming aggressive, becoming intimidating, trying to humiliate or shame you. Now, they might do this through bringing up your past, bringing up insecurities, vulnerabilities that you've shared in confidence with them. Now, this is, again, you're seeing the cycle of behavior playing out. Now, when you think about like emotional unavailability, there's a whole load of nuance to that as well. But basically, if you think about it, the person's completely checked out. They're choosing to ignore you. They don't want to support you. They're making no attempt at connection. And that will also foster and build resentment. And again, if you look at all this stuff about being criticized, put down, demeaned, humiliated, sworn at, name called, now, the being put down, that could also be in front of people. It might be behind closed doors, could be in front of your kids, could be in front of your family, your peers. There's a whole thing about trying to humility, trying to make you feel small, trying to make you feel like you're not enough or less than. And also, when you're exposed to this kind of communication, this kind of behavior or blame cycles, there will also be a theme of that person trying to justify it. There'll be zero responsibility taken on their part. And if they do offer up something, it'll probably be like an empty promise that things are going to change, an empty apology, maybe some theatrics or drama, getting upset saying that they didn't mean it or whatever it is. And what this means that if you're in that kind of dynamic, there is no safety. There's no ability for you to like get your needs met. There's no ability for you to resolve any disagreements without their fear of being a massive reaction, or you don't even know what kind of reaction you're going to get depending on the dynamic. So that means that conflict can't be resolved, connection is shattered, that's done. You have no support from the relationship. In fact, the relationship is actually probably the biggest source of your overwhelm, your distress. Um, and again, you're just living feeling constantly invalidated. Like you've no way of expressing yourself. In fact, your actual sense of self is going to be diminished and damaged over time. So if we talk about the actual impact, just firstly on that exposure to that kind of communication cycle, your self-esteem's gone. It's going to be crippled the longer you're in that kind of dynamic. From a nervous system perspective, you're going to be operating from complete overwhelm. You'll often hear people say like they're walking on eggshells. They're totally afraid. They're living in fear. They don't know which version of this person that they're going to get. Sometimes the responses are over responses and under responses proportionate to what's actually happened, and that completely messes with a person's sense of self, their ability to read a situation, their ability to feel safety and trust. And it just dysregulates the nervous system. It creates so many issues. Um, Impact on your mood, your sleep, your quality of life, your vitality, your well-being, your physical wellness as well, being exposed to that. You know, I've heard this a lot, like not recognizing yourself over time because you've just been completely worn down. You don't know who you are anymore. You don't know how you got into this situation. This is often coupled with loneliness, isolation, disconnection. And as I mentioned, the nervous system's completely hijacked. So there's so many other ways that this can show up mentally, physically, emotionally. But at the core of this, your self worth and your value, your sense of self, your identity, that's completely shattered. Now, as a person, say there's like a spectrum of this behavior going on. None of it's good, all of it's bad. But in terms of like what that person's being exposed to, if they haven't put two and two together that this is really bad, or they don't know how to get out of the situation, or they're just head down trying to get through it, not really knowing because they're not resourced to be able to do anything, they may become really avoidant. They mightn't use their voice. They mightn't draw any attention to themselves. They might make themselves small. They mightn't be able to communicate for themselves. Like everything then starts to center around that other person, and that's intentional. That person knows that they're doing that. But you can see, in my experience, I've seen a massive change with people when we've begun to unpack this and start working through these wounds. But at the very beginning, that is often something that they'll say, like, I lost my voice, I lost my sense of self, I lost my identity, I don't know who I was anymore. Even though I was holding myself, I wouldn't have drawn attention to myself. I was living in chronic fear. And that is a direct impact of being in that kind of container. Now, on another level, there's often a lot of emotional abuse in these kind of containers. So very often we'll think about physical abuse and intimidation and threats and violence and all the horrible things that come with being in a toxic relationship, but also the longer term impact would be emotional abuse. That can have seriously debilitating consequences the longer you've been exposed to it. And one of the hallmarks of that would be manipulation. Now, I did a whole episode on gaslighting. That would be worth checking out if you want to dig on that in more detail. But that is essentially at its core attacking a person's grasp on reality. So distorting their ability to trust themselves, making them feel they've no grasp on what's really truly real without that partner's input. Now, I could expand on that a lot, but as I said, there's already an episode on that that's worth digging into. But manipulation can also include guilt tripping and emotional blackmail. It can also be threatening to harm themselves or to harm others, which would also come under abuse and intimidation. But when you think about it from a perspective of somebody threatening to hurt themselves, that creates chronic and massive overwhelm and distress, because then there's a guilt piece, there's an obligation piece, there's a fear of that person doing something and them feeling responsible for that person's action and choice. Now that is a horrendous thing to experience, and I've worked with a lot of people that have been through that. But the thing is, that's also a conscious and intentional decision that that person has communicated that and put that expectation on the person. They know that that's the last ditch attempt to be able to coerce and control them, because the fear of the worst case scenario is so visceral and so real that it traps people, and you should never ever accept feeling trapped in a relationship. That's a massive indicator that you're in a toxic dynamic. Now that also is coupled with very very clear control issues. There's a lack of safety, lack of respect, lack of trust. And that'll show up in a load of different ways, depending on what the person's been exposed to. But basically trying to control every element of your life, where you go, how long you can go for, with who, what way you're looking, how you're showing up, how you're behaving online, what you're allowed to interact with, who you're allowed to interact. interact with, what you can do, what you can't do, all running through the lens of this person's input. And maybe it doesn't start out like that. Maybe it just starts out like them trying to give you a bit of advice or suggestions or whatever it is. But then this becomes chronic and wears you down over time. Now, within control, you'd also be talking about financial abuse. Maybe taking money from you, running up debt on you, limiting your ability to work, creating issues at your work. Again, fostering more dependence. That can also be extended to digital abuse, and again, that can go off into a whole other thing. So maybe the photos of you, maybe the videos of you, maybe they're using that to coerce you, blackmail you, make you compliant for fear of consequence of what could come out of it. But what is underneath this is they're trying to create isolation. They're trying to cut you off from your support network. They're trying to make you more dependent on them. Now, within controlling based behavior, there's also undercurrents potentially of jealousy and insecurity. Now, it can also show up as possessiveness. Now, some people, when you talk about jealousy, like ultimately, I'm not, how do I say this the right way? I'm not shaming anybody that has jealousy, but when you look at it through the lens of toxic behavior and a toxic relationship, it's an extreme example of this, and it's being used to justify all sorts of really, really damaging behavior. Now, possessiveness as well is another massive indicator that something's not okay. Like, you should feel that there's trust. You shouldn't feel suffocated. You shouldn't feel that you're living with paranoia and suspicion constantly, because that's that person's insecurities. That's on them. That's their personal responsibility to figure that shit out and work through it. You should not be coerced and blamed and put down on all these different things for that person's unresolved stuff. And the longer you're in that, it will feel suffocating, it will feel smothering, it will feel unsafe. And it will affect your safety and your self worth. You know, you hear stories all the time of people becoming violent. They're going out and doing stuff because they got a notion into their head that something was happening that was just completely off the wall, like it wasn't accurate at all. And the fear of that person becoming volatile or doing something again creates that overwhelm and not feeling resourced to be able to deal with it, not knowing how to get away from the person, not knowing what's the next step, what am I supposed to do, because you don't want to pull anybody else into that cycle. So as I said, I living with chronic paranoia and suspicion would wear anybody down. You're not going to have any independence. You're not going to have your support system. You won't have your autonomy, not being able to make your own choices, decisions of where you're going. No freedom just to be yourself. And underneath that, that is exactly what that person is taking from me. And it is debilitating. And as I said, the hallmark of that is just not knowing yourself, just not recognizing yourself. Even when you see people and they've come out of a really toxic relationship, they just don't look themselves, even the way they're holding themselves. And it takes time. It does take time and intentional healing. And I'm going to dig on that in this episode. But that is, again, when you see somebody that's been through something like that, massive empathy, massive compassion, and also massive patience, because you don't know how long they were exposed to that kind of behavior. So another hallmark of toxic dynamic is boundaries. More specifically, your boundaries are never ever honored, accepted. They're repeatedly, if anything, violated. So when somebody's dismissing, ignoring, and violating them and choosing to do so, that is a clear indicator, crystal clear sign of disrespect. So like there's nothing appropriate about that within a relationship. Once somebody has repeatedly done that, they've no incentive to change. You're not doing anything about it. You mightn't feel or be able to do something depending on the nature of the dynamic. But boundaries are there for a reason. It's they define what's safe and appropriate. Somebody disregarding that or disrespecting it or just ignoring it, that now becomes really unsafe when you think about it. Mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually, that's somebody that doesn't care about what you need to feel safe in that dynamic or feel respect in that dynamic. And that's not something you should ever willingly accept from a partner. Once there's repeat violations of boundaries over and over and over again, it's not good. Like, that's something that you have to see and acknowledge. The other thing that is definitely a hallmark with toxic dynamics is what they would call like the cycle of abuse. Things blow up. There might be tension and anger and frustration for a while. There might be a pattern of what these topics of conversation, what that person's fixating on. And then it blows up. There might be persons lashing out. There could be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. There could be a whole there could be a whole pattern of things playing out. And then what you might have is like a cooling off. They might show that they're resentful. They might, or not resentful, remorseful, say that they're sorry, empty promises, all the rest. Things cool off for a while. And then again, anger, tension starts to build and build. You can see the pattern starting again. Bang, it happens again. Now, the thing that you have to remember about that is that the longer that goes on, it's nearly intuitive. It's predictable. You nearly know in your nervous system that this is going to happen because, again, it is an abusive, toxic dynamic. You have to learn to tune into that somatic awareness, that intuitive feeling that, right, this is going to fucking kick off. I'm in an abusive dynamic. That prolonged tension and anxiety and fear building and building and building, you know something's going to kick off. That is an indicator that this isn't safe. You shouldn't be in that cycle. And one of the things they keep coming back to is if this is a repetitive pattern, you nearly know what they're going to say. You nearly know they're going to promise not to do it again. You nearly know they're going to change. They're going to justify it in some bullshit way. That's the thing you have to come back to and recognize this isn't going to change. Like, the longer this is going on, it's impacting you. And just on that, when we're talking about impact, and this is the thing, like, obviously different people, depending on their personality styles, the support systems that they have around them, what access to healing that they have, will cope with the aftermath of the toxic relationship in a different way. But again, it can be very traumatizing. Some people can end up with PTSD. Some people can end up in cycles of abusive relationships. One of the big things is nervous system dysregulation, not feeling safe, not being able to trust themselves, confidence shot, um, and identity. Their core identity completely changed negatively. All that stress is also held in the body, so it's affecting you physically, it's affecting you emotionally, it's affecting self-worth, self-esteem, your ability to communicate, your ability to set boundaries, your ability to connect, not only just with others, but really truly with yourself, to be able to feel safe in future relationships. um and just on that, like, I remember there was a case I had worked a few years ago, and the person hadn't really fully processed the extent of the abuse that they had went through in a relationship. They obviously knew things weren't great, but they actually hadn't even labeled it as an abusive relationship. But one of the things that came up was avoidance. And that person, like, lost 5, 6 years, maybe longer, not being able to actually go out and have another relationship. They were so impacted by what that person had put them through. They didn't want to repeat performance, and it was years. It was years that they went without a fulfilling connection or any kind of relationship because intuitively they didn't feel safe. They didn't trust themselves. They weren't able to actually understand, how did I end up in this situation, because they never talked about it. And yet there was that chronic dysregulation. There was people pleasing. There was avoidance. There was making themselves small. There was maladaptive coping. There was all those different things that were there that were just unacknowledged, unexpressed. you know, Trauma that hadn't been integrated and cleared, the sense of self hadn't been cleared. And after that was all resolved, that person was able to go on and start having fulfilling relationships. And the thing about it is, different people will handle things in different ways. Like, that was just one example. That person just didn't date for a long time after. But think about all that time that was missed out on because of some fucking dickhead and how they behaved. And the thing is, like, nobody is worth that. But this shows the extent of unhealed, unintegrated trauma, even if we don't understand it as being traumatic at the time. If you're exposed to prolonged emotional abuse, if you're exposed to toxic dynamics long enough, it is going to affect you consciously and unconsciously, and in a nervous system perspective, it is going to show up again and again and again. And you need to recognize the signs of this so that if it starts to present itself, that you know what they do. You don't allow yourself to become isolated. You don't allow yourself to accept certain types of behavior. You learn who and what who you're supposed to seek, or who you're supposed to reach out to, what you're supposed to do, and how to address the situation. So now that I'm obviously talking about the impact of toxic relationships, one of the most important things to look at is what's the cost of doing nothing. So you've just come out of a toxic relationship, right? It's been shit. Maybe it's been 6 months. Maybe it's been a year. There's maybe some residual impact that's there. You don't want to talk about it, which is totally understandable. Um, but there is a really steep cost in not doing anything, choosing not to heal. And as I said, that one example from that one case, that was like 5, 6, 7 years before that person was like, right, fuck, I need to do something. And that was a long time not spent getting needs met, not having fulfilling connections, and missing out on elements of life. Now, for different people, depending on the actual trauma that they've experienced, it could be enduring suffering, going through life with these wounds holding you back, fractured self-identity, fractured self-worth, tolerating things that you shouldn't otherwise be tolerating, missing out on opportunities because your confidence isn't there. It's like you're only half living life and half experiencing the best that life has to offer because of what some dickhead put you through. And like that, I can't even get the words out. Like, you deserve not to be held back by that. So I know it can be a bit intense, the idea of sitting down and unpacking and processing some of this stuff. And I know it's cliche to say it's worth it, but it will be worth it out the other side of it when it is no longer holding you back. Because this is impacting you consciously, unconsciously. It's impacting you physically, mentally, emotionally, even in your physiology. Unintegrated trauma is impacting us. It's impacting us in a whole host of different ways. Um, but even if you do manage to go on and have other relationships, you may find that now you're very anxiously attached. Now you're not able to regulate. Now you're not able to be vulnerable. You've got trust issues. You're maybe not able to communicate, address this other person in a safe way to be able to get your needs met. Or maybe you are getting through things, but there's other ways that this is showing up. It could be showing up in intimacy. It could be showing up in safety. It could be showing up in loads of different ways. But the thing is, it needs to be looked at. It needs to be worked through. It needs to be unpacked. And the thing is, like, you can share it with your partner, but it's one thing inviting somebody in that space and letting them know this happened. Like, I went through these things, and it's another thing to be able to get help and support professionally through this. Because look, it is helpful to feel seen, to feel understood, and to be validated. It's another thing to be resourced, to be able to move through this going forward, and also to integrate the impact of what's happened. Now, that also means consciously and unconsciously the template itself, how you see yourself, and how that then leads to how you're showing up in the world. But when I say resource, I'm even talking about boundary setting, communication, knowing how to regulate the nervous system, loads of different things all have to be addressed. And that is something that has to happen in a professional container, because, again, if accessing this gets really difficult and you get dysregulated or overwhelmed, you need somebody there that's going to be able to contain it, to be able to help you feel safe, to be able to offer secure attachment in that moment, to help you through what you're going through, so that this can be witnessed, this can be validated, and it can be integrated. And that's how you're going to begin to heal going forward. So just on this, I wanted to touch on a few people. Well, I'm not going to name names, but there's a couple of cases that came up when I was thinking about this, of people that have worked through. And even just when I think about where they were at point A, it's so mad to see what's changed after. Like, I remember working with this one individual who was stuck in a dynamic with a guy for years and years and years. And at the core of this was this sense of their entire self worth being based on that person's um, attention input, even though this person was an absolute X, Y, and Z. You can use your own imagination for that. Couldn't get away from the person. In fact, every time this person showed up, there was complete nervous system overwhelm. And the thing about it is, this has nothing to do with intelligence. This has nothing to do with, like, how you're making sense of things. It's just complete dysregulation, fear, panic, like wounding to the self, wounding to the self-esteem. And I have seen this with so many high performers, professionals, really successful individuals being worn down with these people. And the thing is, like, you can be in and out of different types of therapy, and it's not shitting on any specific approaches. But the thing is, I feel like an integrated approach where you're looking at things consciously, unconsciously, somatically, and you're also processing the full extent of the wounding, is probably one of the most effective, important ways to go forward, because you're then being taught how you're going to be able to break the cycle. You're able to look at your conditioning, you're able to look at your attachments, you're able to understand, right, this is why this was coming up. But also, when you think about the identity and your sense of self and how that's been shaped and molded by certain things you were exposed to growing up, you can then start to see the traits and the pattern matching that was playing out with the person that you were in that maybe toxic or traumatic relationship with. And that was something that I had done with multiple clients. Like, sometimes the presenting problem, the extent of the coping's not totally made apart until we look at the whole thing in context. And the thing is, like, once this person was able to start unpacking stuff and clearing historical trauma and the sense of self, the impact from them relationships, things just opened up to the point where that person had no more fucking input or power over her. She could see him, didn't really give a fuck about him, but could really see him for the first time. And that person's sense of worth was not dependent on that person anymore. And that was a game changer, because from that point then going forward, the template's gone. That person hasn't had any interaction with this version of that person anymore. You know, they're resourced, they're empowered, they're confident, they're using their voice, they know how to regulate, they're not defining themselves by them anymore. And it's not, they say, like, even with somebody really emotionally manipulative or abusive, like, they're not going to put themselves ever in that situation, but they're not living in fear of it. They're not living in fear of bumping on this person, because those triggers have been worked through, those wounds have been cleared, and they can now operate from a place of confidence, independence, trusting themselves, because the work has been done. For other people, it can be maybe one specific moment in time. Like I've worked with a lot of people that have had relationship with them where it was one thing that that person might have done that humiliated them or demeaned them or created a complex or a narrative about the self, and that needed to be done. Even intimacy too. There's so many things that I've seen with wounding and toxic relationships where people start to accept, like, I can't get my needs met in a relationship. It's not really about me, like how I'm showing up in these containers. It's not about a partner at all. It's about what I am or how I'm meant to be there for them. And like there's so many things that can become warped and distorted through how somebody behaves towards us. And that's why again your boundaries are so fucking important, because physically and sexually as well, somebody shouldn't be mistreating you. And that can have lasting consequences going forward, especially if you're being used and demeaned or made to feel like you don't matter or your needs don't matter. That's also really important. Um, I'm just looking at some of these old ones. Like, I mean, one of the things that I think that is also most urgent for people, if any of this is resonant with you and you're in a container like this now, please seek help. Get in touch with somebody, because safely detaching and working through things is crucial. It's crucial. Like, I would never advise anybody just to listen to a podcast and wing it. You need a support system. You need professional help in these dynamics, or even support services to get you through the actual getting away process. Um, there's plenty of time in the aftermath from getting away from that person to be able to start unpacking stuff and processing it, and it takes time, and you have to be patient with yourself. Um, that's my input anyway. You know, having worked with clients, I can see the difference in how long maybe they've been holding something, like how many repeat dynamics they've experienced in relationships before they've put two and two together and went, right, fuck, I think I need to go and speak to somebody about this, because this is another relationship that's had a similar pattern, similar traits, or I have coped in a similar way. And it's, again, it's not the intelligence thing. It could be an unconscious process that's playing out that needs to be worked through. There's old triggers or wounding that still haven't shifted that need to be addressed. And the thing is, like, we're not supposed to heal in isolation. And as I said, it's one thing talking to your friends, it's one thing talking to your partner, but it's another thing getting actual practical tools and resources that are going to create change. And it's a massive difference. I have been privileged to be able to experience this for myself, you know, as a person as well as a practitioner. And it just eased the amount of suffering that you can go through. It can make it infinitely faster. Like, there is rapid change when we're working both consciously and unconsciously. It doesn't have to be a whole long drawn out process. Sometimes it is if we have a lot of compound trauma, but it doesn't have to be years and years and years in therapy, you know. And even with the somatic approach, which I really do feel like it has its merit for longer term recovery, especially where people don't feel resourced at all. They talk about stuff. One of the big things I've taken away from it is just, if you're somebody that felt very disconnected from yourself, it's about bringing you back into the body. It's about actually making you aware of your internal space, your, what you would call, like, seeing like your internal thermostat, like knowing where you're holding tension, knowing where you're holding emotions, where, how intense that's feeling, like what they would call interoception, your ability to have internal awareness, and to be able to regulate and move through bigger emotions. Now, obviously, it's a bit intense because, you know, you're starting to become aware of what you're holding. You start to become aware of more sadness. You start, like, it's like if you're coming out of a freeze, say you've been wounded and you've been traumatized and you're coming out of a freeze, the extent of what you're going to begin to feel starts to become more real. It starts to become more prominent because you've been operating from freeze, and that can be a bit intense in itself. But out the other side of that, there's also a greater capacity for joy, for happiness, for fulfillment. And that's why it's so worth doing the work, because, again, thinking about all the things that happen in relationships, your first arguments, conflicts, disagreements, if you're having meltdowns or you're getting really, really overwhelmed and you're not able to regulate, that is where somatic work can begin to become invaluable. So you learn how to soothe yourself, you learn how to get grounded, you learn how to get regulated, and then within therapy, learn how to lean back into these conversations, how to be able to have them effectively, how to how to even identify a safe individual through their behavior, through how they're showing up, through how they're communicating, conflict and repair, and all those kinds of things. Um, so I spoke about the somatic thing. Again, like, I like a load of different interventions, loads of different rapid change techniques. I've mentioned working consciously, unconsciously, but also even some of the transformational family therapy stuff, looking at your historically, like a generational trauma, looking at attachments, looking at all the stuff that's maybe in the family of origin, and understanding how, what have I inherited from this blueprint? How has this led me into these kinds of dynamics? What traits was I exposed to growing up? And is any of this, am I replaying patterns or conditioning from the past, about recognizing that it's there. And this is where I think therapy can be really, really transformational in that regard, because once you become aware of it, like it's not something that you're ever going to consciously ignore. You're just not. Um, Aye, and that like as I said, even with toxic relationships, especially if you grew up modeling people pleasing, you never seen healthy boundaries, you never seen healthy conflict. You might have been exposed to the opposite. Actually, you might have grew up living in fear. You might have grew up thinking people pleasing is the only way to diffuse tension, to hide yourself, to not draw attention to yourself. Um, Coping with all sorts of different behavior, or you might have grew up in a very enmeshed dynamic. You might have grew up witnessing codependent dynamics. There might have been addiction, trauma, mental health issues in the family. All these things can lead or give you like a predisposition where you might be drawn to those kinds of dynamics. Now, it's not to say it's a rule of thumb, but it can lead you in that direction without knowing it. And that's why looking at your template is so important, because again, once you're aware of it, you can either choose to transform it or transfer it. You're only going to transfer it if you don't make it conscious and you don't choose to work on it. So you can choose to transform it then by actually sitting down, unpacking it, and learning from it. And this is how you become resourced as well, because you also see the strengths of what's in the family. You start to see the strengths of like the resilience of all the things that have helped you survive. But as an adult, you might need it anymore, and that's part about becoming safe in yourself. Um, Aye, so again, one of the other big things about boundaries as well is learning how to do it safely, learning how to do it outside the scope of with a toxic person. And that's one of the things that therapy is really invaluable post toxic relationship, is learning how to find your voice again, learning how to rebuild your confidence, doing things that are going to help move the needle. They build that sense of confidence, forward motion, positive direction, you actualizing trust in yourself, because keeping your word, doing things that are helping you learn to trust yourself. Um, and that's the thing then, when it comes to boundaries and things like that, obviously it's one thing to intellectually understand how to do it. It's another thing to be able to do it, even though you're feeling afraid, even though you're feeling a wee bit under resourced. And like that's where I like working consciously and unconsciously, because we can clear the trigger so that pattern's not firing as intensely. And then also knowing that you're in a therapeutic container and you're supported, you can then, go and do what you need to do. If it goes well, happy days. If it doesn't, come back, unpack it, learn from it, go and do it again. And again, working both consciously and unconsciously, or even somatically, this drastically improves over time, like night and day difference. And that's how you begin to find your voice again. That's how you begin to start to trust yourself, because you're not operating from a place of fear, chronic overwhelm, dysregulation, and avoidance. You're starting to become resourced. You're starting to become confident in yourself. You're starting to trust yourself. And when you have that, and also the identity, once the core identity has changed and it's been improved, or the old concept of self has been let go of, it's a game changer. Everything begins to change after that. Obviously, what we were saying there about education and around codependency, codependent dynamics, enmeshment, toxic behavior, toxic relationships, knowing what a safe person is, knowing like conflict and repair and communication strategies, because you might not have inherited any of this stuff growing up. You might not have had it modeled. So this is all stuff that is part of your healing journey post toxic relationship. It's part of a lot of fucking therapy in general, but it's crucial with toxic relationships. Now, also within that, post toxic relationship, like your self care is crucial. Taking time to look after yourself, taking time to connect to yourself, figure out who you are without that person who's worn you down. But being patient and gentle with yourself and compassionate with yourself is so fucking crucial, because at the end of the day, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint when it comes to your healing. You have to take time yourself. There's going to be times where it's going to feel too much. There's going to be times where you're going to have setbacks. But as long as you're patient with yourself and you keep showing up and you keep that intention to heal and move forward, you will get there. You will come out the other side of it if you get yourself into the right kind of containers and around the right people. Don't isolate yourself. Don't feel like you need to do it all yourself. And again, I know it's hard for people to revisit, but if you push it down and you ignore it, it's going to come out again. It's going to come out through another person triggering you. It's going to come out through another relationship. It's going to come out there. This pattern is going to show up somewhere else. It's inevitable. We can't push it down because it's in our unconscious. It's in our, it's directing and influencing our behavior if we ignore it. And that's the reality. It's it's one of those things that we don't have to talk about it, and we think like, right, well, we don't need to let it have power over us or affect how we see ourselves. But by not doing anything about it, it's indirectly influencing what we're settling for, the quality of life we have, the safety that we have in our body, our sense of self, and the opportunities that we may or may not be missing as a result of not doing anything about it. So, hope that has kind of explained the bulk of like the signs of toxic relationships moving past it. But one of the other things I wanted to talk on, um, I'm just seeing this here in my notes now actually, is trauma bonds. And this is something that is often overlooked. Um, but again, it's important just to speak to this in case you're in this cycle. You've been out of a toxic relationship for a while and this is still resonant or coming up for you. So, one of the indicators of a trauma bond is still having a really strong attachment to the person that was abusive. Maybe long after the relationship has ended, there might be a sense of loyalty. You might be reasoning or justifying the person's behavior, and the abuse that you endured. Now, you might be oscillating from like conflicting feelings about this person as well. You might be defending one minute, defending aspects of their behavior another minute, while also recognizing that it was really toxic, it was really abusive. There might be a sense, as I said, of loyalty, of intimacy, like affection, but also repulsion and being disgusted. Like there can be this oscillation in and around the feelings, like loving and hating them, resenting them, but wanting to be with them. And that's again an indicator of being really, really overwhelmed, really chronically dysregulated, operating from a place of like fear of being abandoned, not knowing who you are, not being able to trust yourself. Like your identity, your sense of self has been completely fractured in that sense. You're not able to now live your life or move forward the way you were before this relationship. And that's the thing about not being able to regulate. Like you're not, like you're operating from a place of complete overwhelm. Again, when you look at the behavior that that person was exposed to, there would have been those cycles of abuse, constant blame, constant criticism, shaming, humiliation, emotional abuse, all those things going on over time. And yet, one of the other things is if you put this person on a pedestal because of how they looked, or maybe the sexual connection that was there, or maybe they were very wealthy, or there was some other benefit in some regard to being connected with this person at one point, you're also grieving aspects of that now changing, because that is now impacting how you see yourself, how you value yourself, because of how they've treated you over time. And you may have fostered a dependence, but in a trauma bond, you would have developed a dependence on that person for you to figure out stuff, your sense of self, your sense of value, your sense of self worth. And again, post relationship ending, you might be caught in a self criticizing, self deprecating, self blaming, shaming, guilt cycle post the relationship ending. And that's a hallmark of unintegrated trauma, of a trauma bond with that person. Because you're not able to move on, you're not able to live life. It'll be showing up when you're not being able to experience relationships again, massive trust issues, as mentioned, misplaced sense of loyalty. And again, the nervous system dysregulation, that'll show up in a whole load of different ways, even with attachment dynamics, communication, all the rest of it. So that's one of the things that, again, post toxic relationship to be looking out for, to be thinking about. And I think that's one of the things that's not really talked about so much after a toxic relationships end is the struggles and challenges that people go through when it comes to trying to create a healthier relationship after you've been through a toxic relationship. And that's another reason why it's so important to go and get professional support to heal after a toxic relationship, because it's going to take a wee bit of time anyway with the right person. And like, I feel like people can heal in relationships, but obviously when you're working through things and you're getting support and you're with the right person, relationships 100% can be a space of healing. But if we're operating from a place of wounding and unintegrated trauma, we also run the risk of being re-traumatized and hurt by another person if we don't take the time to unpack, process, heal, and integrate what we've been through. And I think it is also so important that what you've been through is witnessed. You're validated, you're able to express, you're seen, you're heard, and you're supported in your pain, and then that's allowed to be processed and integrated effectively, so that you're able to go forward then with a template and with a set of resources to be able to create healthy, fulfilling relationships going forward. So I know that was a wee bit of a heavy episode. It's been something I've been meaning to do for a while. I could have spent ages talking about different clients, and I don't want to name names or anything like that, but I'm so proud of all of them. Like anybody that I've been able to help clear any kind of impact of trauma, any kind of impact on how that maybe a betrayal or abuse or certain things, how that impacted them, how it was holding them back in their life. And it's one of the most fulfilling things, being able to see them living life, being happy, being successful, and happy relationships. I'm fucking buzzing for them. But I also understand when people are operating from a place of wounding and fear and avoidance, why it's so hard to go and talk about, why it's so hard, especially if therapy's been disappointing or re-triggering. Like, I've had experiences talking with people where, bringing you to moments of trauma and then you're not being supported through it, or you're being left then with that not contained. And it can be really, really fucking disconnecting. It can make you feel unsafe in the process. And it's not knocking anybody, like, but it's not all approaches are the same. That would be all we'd be saying. And it's different things for different people. As I said, somatic work might be perfect, hypnotherapy might be perfect, it might be a combination of different things that might be what you need. But most important thing is to prioritize your well-being, post-toxic relationship, and get help so that you're able to heal and move forward. The person that caused the wounding is never ever going to be the solution to your problems. You don't need closure from a fucker like that. You just don't. You don't. It's one of the ways we can get stuck and caught in cycles of being hurt over and over and over again, thinking that person has the keys to our healing. They just don't. They don't. You don't need anything from them in order to heal. Like, the right professional support will be able to facilitate what you need to get out the other side of that cycle. So if any of this has resonated with you, or you know anybody that would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. If it is resonating with you, please get in touch. I would love to help you. I just want to say thanks again for listening. I'll see you all again soon.